All right, so we're going to start off by doing an exercise to ask yourselves to put yourself in this case of a user of Tech Hire, the program that we're going to talk about. I'll start by telling a story about myself, and then I'll ask you to think of yourself in a similar situation. So when I was in 3rd grade, I moved to a new school, and my school split people for math into levels by their skill. I was put in the most remedial math class. When I realized this, I thought, wow, what's wrong with me? I used to think I was good at math, but they must have realized something about me that I didn't know. So I took home the workbook that we were supposed to complete over the course of the semester, and that weekend I finished the whole thing. I brought it to my teacher on Monday, and she put me in the highest level math class. So why don't you guys close your eyes, bear with me here, please actually close your eyes, and think about a situation in your own life where you felt similarly, where you had a set of capabilities and people weren't able to recognize those and they held you back. Think about how it made you feel. Okay, you can open your eyes. So I'm sure we've all experienced cases like this. In my case, it first made me feel really insecure about myself. When I think back to it now, it makes me feel really frustrated that my teacher didn't give me the chance to show my capabilities and my potential before she made an assessment about me and what I was capable of. But for me, and for probably many of you, the stakes are pretty low. For others, the stakes are much higher. People like Lashana Lewis. Lashana grew up in East St. Louis, and she always had a passion for computers. She taught herself to code in middle school and kept programming all the way through high school until she got into a CS program in college. Then her mom passed away. She had to drop out of school to take care of her brother, and she spent the next 5 years doing that and working as a bus driver just to make ends meet. When he graduated high school, she decided that she was going to try to apply for jobs in coding, her career and passion. She applied to hundreds of companies in St. Louis and couldn't even get an interview or a response from one of them. But Lashana's pretty stubborn, so she went and found an organization co-founded by one of the founders of Square. And what they did is they assessed Lashana's coding skills and they vouched for her with the company MasterCard. MasterCard interviewed her and wound up bringing her on as an apprentice, then a software engineer, and she's now a senior developer at MasterCard 3 years later, and they've hired 10 more people like Lashana. Pretty awesome story. But Lashana's not alone. There are millions of people across the country who struggled early on in life, had a setback, and they've been totally stuck because of that throughout the course of their lives. 6 million young people who are out of school and out of work, 2 million long-term unemployed people whose maybe whole jobs and industries have gone away. And the premise behind Tech Hire, the thing we're going to talk about, is that the real opportunity in this country is not just the capital sitting on the balance sheets of companies, but it's all of this human potential that we're not tapping into today.
And this is incredibly frustrating. I have family that experienced in the Great Recession. They were out of work for a long time. It took 5 years to get back to the job they had already had, and just so much stress, so much struggle. So it's terrible, it's unfair, it's hard. But it's not just that. I would assert this is the biggest economic barrier holding our country back, and here's why. If you actually look at those 80 million Americans, and you look at the capital stock of this country, the productive capacity, it turns out that while 40 trillion of it, sounds like a lot, is in the private sector, businesses, equipment, software, all that stuff that we optimize every way, turns out 150 to 200 trillion, 4 to 5 times as much, is human capital. It's the value of people's learning, education, experience, et cetera. And unlike the invested capital, the equity capital, it is not at all optimized. If you think about how much this whole process is suffused in ignorance, how few institutions can actually help you to optimize, and certainly for people like Lashana, it is the biggest barrier to economic growth. So when you hear people talking about secular stagnation and where are we going to go, this is the core problem. And, spoiler alert, it isn't about the robots. It's not the technology. It's not that technology doesn't matter here. It's a very important part of the story. But it is not the thing that has made this happen over the last 30 years. Technology is a tool. If I give you a hammer, you can build me a house or you can smash my head. The question is, what are your incentives to use the technology? What are our systems' incentives to use the technology? And that is the problem. The fault lies not in our technologies, but in our institutions. To give 3 critical themes in that, number 1, selection over investment. If the whole United States were just one company, like USA Inc., and everyone was on your payroll, here's one thing you would not invest in. You would not invest in software to screen people out and decide who you wanted to hire or not. Because if someone was producing nothing, that would be zero. You would like aim to have software and business processes that actually got the most out of everybody, help people find their highest and best use. You would invest in that way. But once you break it up, you have 1 million companies, 2 million companies, well then, your best strategy might be, no, just get someone that someone's already trained, right? Get someone that someone's already selected and screened, right, for you. And that's what we're seeing. We have companies poaching out the front door, being poached out the back door, and then wondering why they can't find the talent. Because where do experienced people, skilled workers come from? They come from actually getting entry-level people, training them, and so forth. But the amount of training has fallen by 30%, and the entry-level jobs used to be 50%, like new hires. Now it's only 7%. 93% of jobs are some version of, we want someone with 10 years experience, these degrees, and so forth. And about those degrees, it's not only that we have a bias for selection over investment, but also the way we do selection is based on signals of quality that are fundamentally about selectivity, right? So in other words, what school did you go to? How far did you get in school? What degrees, et cetera? Which means selectivity, the flip side of selectivity is exclusion. You literally cannot have selectivity without exclusion. And so if the only signals we have, right, then you leave a whole bunch of people out. A data point, 20% of secretaries and administrative assistants have bachelor's degrees, but over 2/3 of the new job postings for secretaries require a bachelor's degree to be considered today. 80% of secretaries can't apply for 2/3 of the new jobs in their field, and then we wonder why we're not seeing mobility. And then the final thing is this question of what kind of capital do you invest in to return? Like, we are a system, and Tim O'Reilly's been writing a lot about this, that is optimizing return on invested capital, not on human capital, and that's got to stop. So how do we get going? Tip of the spear, tech hire.
So what is tech hire? Tech hire started as a call to action that the White House made for mayors, employers, and people in communities across the country to come together to rapidly train people whose talent was being untapped for one of the 600,000 open tech jobs across the country. And doing that by stealing from already existing promising models like Launch Code and spreading them to more places. Tech hire started last year with 21 communities as diverse as Albuquerque to New York City to San Francisco, and now tomorrow we'll be announcing that it's spread to 70 communities across the country. The goal in this first year was really to pilot something and see, could it work? We've really learned 3 things. One, there's a huge demand from people to have these opportunities. In rural Eastern Kentucky, they started a program that had 10 slots. 400 former coal miners applied for that program. Second, it's working. We've seen that over this first year, 6,000 people have been trained, many of them still in training, 4,000 people have been placed so far, and many more communities, employers, and others are joining the movement. And then lastly, and I think one thing that's most important for scale, is employers are actually seeing value from this program in terms of higher retention, in terms of cutting their cost of sourcing, and in terms of the productivity of this talent.
So we've seen, this is a new tools, but it's not a new story. And my commitment to this, I left the White House a year and a half ago, and this is what I'm doing full time through Opportunity at Work. But my own family story, like into the middle class, was this story. It was a story of investment in technology. This is 1970, my parents, when my father, who was working in a factory, he was a shipping clerk, saw an ad to learn COBOL. And they said, like, hey, if you can learn this thing, you can write your own ticket. He said, okay, I'm gonna try. He actually quit his job, like studied this for 5 months, and sure enough, my father, who had never worked in an office before, was given that opportunity, and it turned out he was great at it. And he loved it. And this was sort of so satisfying to him, and this was our path into the middle class. So again, technology, he's writing it. So what has to happen for it to work for people as opposed to be done to people? The first is, as Ryan is focused on, is the hiring. Hiring based on pedigree and history cannot be the answer. You will never get inclusion that way, because people can learn new things, but there are no time machines. They can't go back in time and get the right degrees and like all of that stuff. So you've got to be able to hire based on capabilities, abilities, and that is what Tech Hire does. Second, expanding learning pathways. So learning pathways are so stratified, unbelievably stratified by professional status, social status, financial status, et cetera. They need to be laddered, that you need to be able to get to the next level. You need to have the visibility. And again, once you actually have a scenario where these employers, these 1,500 employers, for example, are willing to hire you based on skills, they won't screen you out based on pedigree, then you can get there, and the business models can work around it. And then finally, finance. So we have a student loan system, which definitely kind of helps a lot of people, but there's no guidance in it. And then you have FICO, which is the poorer you are, the more you pay, or you don't get it at all. We have an ability to actually change that, coming in on the back of Tech Hire, so that you can actually be financed based on your potential, and the risk doesn't all land with you. If you make it, it's a debt. If you don't make it, it's equity, right? It gets shared. Can we make this change? Like, if we can leave you with one message, it is yes, we can, and in fact, we have. This is looking, those lines you're seeing are high school attendance by Americans. In a 30-year period between about 1909 and 1939, we went from 9% of American teenagers going to high school to 79% going to high school. Swept across the country, the high school movement. The high school movement had a demand signal, it had an operating model, and had a financing model. The demand signal was factories, telegraph offices saying high school degrees preferred. The operating model was the school board and the high school itself. And the financing model was local property tax. So that's what we've got here. And what we want you to do, everyone in this room and people across the country need to invest in a movement. Call it what you will. We'll call it the Tech Hire movement for the moment. But it's a movement like the high school movement that builds institutions as fundamental as the American high school, but builds them for lifelong learning and earning for everyone. So, according to these principles, what can we do? And everything we're about to show you is we're starting it now, in 2017. If you want to participate, you can, right? First of all, the careers. We are building a suite of software, of validation, skills validation, kind of like AP exams, right? It shows you can do the work no matter what, where you went to school, whatever. Like, we need your help in building that. We're rallying volunteers. Part of the model is people volunteer to interview. People with the skills, they could be interviewed, but they give you feedback, right? You learn. You never get that when you're doing a job interview. We want 10,000, we have like a couple hundred volunteers, it's working great. We want 10,000 in 2017. And then learning pathways. Ryan mentioned there are going to be 70 Tech Hire communities. Some of them are well equipped to sort of organize this themselves. Others need help. We're starting a Tech Hire Ignite Fund, which is essentially a pay for progress for these communities. So pooling that money for communities you want is fantastic. And then finally, this Talent Equity Fund. We are ready to prototype this in 2017. And the idea here is to take training institutions with very high success rates, and they put some skin in the game to actually finance lower income people. But the way it works, you have some skin in the game, but if you succeed, it turns into a debt. The you that's earning $20,000 more a year pays that debt. If you're one of the 10 or 15 or 20% that don't succeed, you're not left with a big debt. That's the equity part. So this is the model, and we're going to open up, once we get it tuned, we're going to open up all sorts of private and public capital. But these are the outlines of a movement that can make a difference, and I believe that everyone in this room can make a difference to that movement and to that outcome. I hope you join us. Thank you.